I don't really envy the Minister for having to follow that one up. But I am here to introduce Senator, the Honourable Katy Gallagher, who has dedicated her working life to improving the lives of Australians, whether it was advocating for people with disability as a community worker, standing up for the rights of public service as servants, as a community and public sector union organiser, or delivering for citizens of Canberra as the Chief Minister of the ACT. As the Minister for the ACT government and later Chief Minister, Katy Gallagher has led a progressive and future-focused government that legislated marriage equality, started Australia's first public nurse-led walk-in medical centres, and committed the government to a 100% renewable energy target by 2020. As Senior Cabinet Minister holding the federal government's finance, data, digital, public service and women's portfolios, Katy Gallagher is passionate about putting people on the forefront of government decision-making, policy development and service delivery.
Hi, it's Katy Gallagher here, the Minister for Finance and Women. I'm speaking to you today from the beautiful Ngunnawal country, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I particularly want to acknowledge the First Nations women joining you in the room and online today, who are the leaders in their community, holders of knowledge and advocates for equality. I would have loved to have joined you in person. Instead, I'm weathering the cold Canberra winter for the end of the parliamentary sitting fortnight. I want to thank Equality Rights Alliance and all of you for joining this symposium and for all the work that you have done and will continue to do to make Australia a better, fairer and more equal place for women. The women's movement is a powerful force in this country, and as Minister for Women, it's a privilege to be able to work with all of you to get on with ticking the items off the to-do list that so many women have been championing and fighting for decades. Whether it be finally getting super paid on parental leave in the budget or the expansion of paid parental leave to a full 6 months by 2026, the changes we've made to the industrial relations system to make workplaces fairer and safer for women, or wage increases for care workers whose work has been undervalued and underpaid for too long. Record investments in women's safety initiatives, including prevention initiatives and changes to the justice system to make sure that survivors aren't re-traumatised when they come forward. Increases to Commonwealth rent assistance and the single parenting payment. The opening of 22 endometriosis and pelvic pain clinics, longer complex gynaecological specialist consultations covered by Medicare, and more support for GPs to provide better menopause care. None of these would have been possible without your work, your advocacy, your assistance and your support. And we recognise there is so much more to do, and we remain committed to doing everything we can to drive equality in Australia. Now, it's been just a month since the budget and nearly 4 months since Working for Women launched, which outlines our gender equality priorities for the next 10 years. This strategy provides the framework to guide that future work, and each and every budget we'll keep investing against the priorities laid out in that strategy. And I will work with all of you in our steadfast commitment to achieve gender equality to benefit all of us, especially the women and girls of Australia. So all the best with the symposium. I look forward to hearing about the important conversations you have over the next few days.
I want to say a massive thank you to the Minister, and also, I guess, an important reminder that sometimes we are all a little out of sync, and it's important events like this where we can try and get in sync with each other. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge those who are joining us online and say thank you so much for being here and being part of the conversation. We will be checking in with the chat as we go through, so please feel free amongst yourselves, but also with us, to be engaging as much as you'd like to. This space is for you also. The next speaker we're going to hear from is also a video from Dr. Anna Cody, Sex Discrimination Commissioner, who began her role in September 2023. Before this, Dr. Cody had a distinguished career as an academic and using the law as a vehicle for change. As a lawyer and a passionate advocate for human rights, she has used multiple vehicles, multiple ways of ensuring that the fulfilment of human rights obligations in Australia and other nations are at the forefront of her work. Most recently, she was the Dean of the School of Law and Professor at Western Sydney University, and she's led education and research impact within the school to better reflect the diversity of the community and also the important intersection of law and justice. We thank Dr. Anna Cody.
Hello, I'm Anna Cody, Australia's Sex Discrimination Commissioner. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I record this video today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and also any First Nations people listening to this message. I also extend my thanks to the Equality Rights Alliance team for having me speak today, and to Helen in particular for your steadfast leadership of ERA over the last 12 years. I've very much enjoyed working with ERA and Helen since I began in this job. As you would know, I'm keen to use an intersectional lens in my work for gender equality. So why is this important? And what does an intersectional lens look like? There are many facets of our identities, some of us women, some men, some non-binary, some born into immigrant families, and some of us have families who've lived in Australia a long time. Some of us First Nations, some not, some with a disability, others not. Some of us with same-sex partners, others living in heterosexual relationships. And some of us practice or are of a faith, others not, and we come from different classes. An intersectional approach recognises that each of these parts of ourselves can be privileged in society or have more power associated with them. It recognises that there are systems which privilege particular groups and reinforce existing patterns of power. And we all experience a combination of these factors which contribute to our experience of life, access to education, to work, to housing, and choices that we have. Gender doesn't exist on its own, and you'd all know of the groundbreaking work of African-American scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. So why is it so important to use an intersectional lens? Failure to apply an intersectional lens to the work that we do only serves to further strengthen systems that produce marginalisation and privilege. Structural barriers and inequality then continue. So how does this practically look? Marginalisation can result in the increased frequency and severity of violence. Trans women of colour living in Australia are more likely than other women to report having been assaulted by a stranger. As well, women with disability are almost twice as likely to experience violence compared to men with disability or men and women without disability by multiple abusers over time. First Nations women are 32 times more likely to be hospitalised and 11 times more likely to die from assault than non-Indigenous women in Australia. Bisexual women, trans men, non-binary folks experience higher rates of violence from intimate partners and family, and that's compounded by ethnicity and disability. I encourage you to think always in your work, how would a First Nations woman think and feel about this? Would this decision reduce exclusion of trans women or non-binary people? How does this decision include migrant and refugee women? You are all leaders, and we need you in the gender equality space, thinking intersectionally. So why are good leaders so important? We know that leaders transform societies. You mobilise individuals, groups, and entire communities to challenge and change attitudes, behaviours, policies, and laws. You can bring people together, spark conversations, and raise the voices of those who are most marginalised. Strong leadership can address social inequities and improve health, education, political participation for all, and particularly women. We know all of that. We also know that leadership often lacks diverse representation. For example, there's a lack of representation in leadership from migrant and refugee women, from the LGBTQI+ community, and from First Nations people. Traditional methods of leadership also fail to reflect the many rich forms of leadership that exist within our communities, and that then impacts the voices that we choose to hear and impacts whose issues we address as a society. It can be seen through the lack of value given in the strength of women's experiences, the lack of equality we face, and the insights we can provide, and the leadership we as women can offer. For example, in First Nations communities, women play strong leadership roles. Women are frequently the ones protesting conditions in prison and deaths in custody. Grandmothers care for children impacted by fetal alcohol syndrome. Women keep their communities together, And it's so important to recognise this leadership and how it challenges the traditional ideas of leadership that we have. It's not a hero model of leadership, it's a building from the bottom up. In facing one of the most systemic forms of inequality, men's use of violence against women, it's helpful to think of an entrapment model which embodies the intersectional approach. The entrapment model for thinking about violence in that intersectional way thinks about how systems keep women unsafe. It recognises that women have agency and that there's value and power of women knowing what they need to do to keep themselves and their families safe. It allows us to examine how race and culture and entrenched racism in structures keep women unsafe, as well as the gendered norms and attitudes. Some structural and cultural changes could make a significant difference. Another example is justice reinvestment, where we see affected communities, women and men leaders, knowing what is needed to address gendered violence. You in the community sector know what's needed. Frequently, it's a lack of regular, reliable funding which prevents change. We know the need to increase funding and allow communities to co-design plans to address gendered violence. By creating effective diversionary and treatment programs, justice reinvestment addresses the underlying causes of crime and family violence and stops it from occurring in the first place. Crucially, justice reinvestment represents a shift away from governments coming in and telling communities what's best and moves towards what is shown to work, local solutions coming from and being implemented by those same communities. An example is the Maranguka project in Burke, New South Wales. Thank you for your time in listening to me and the opportunity to address you with a few thoughts that I have and priorities that I have. And I hope that the next 2 days are really fruitful.
I love listening to Dr. Cody talk. In my day job, I think a lot about leadership and effective and sustainable and effective models of leadership. And I think Dr. Cody is maybe one of the best examples of empathetic, nuanced servant leadership that is around in the government today. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And I would like to pass on to Tasha, who has a bit of a challenge.
Thanks, Bree. So we're going to move to morning tea now. And I guess as Helen has said to us all, this opportunity exists over the next few days to think about what comes next and think about how our work exists in a broader context alongside all of those who are here in the room today. So I guess as we have some extra time for morning tea this morning, I encourage you and maybe challenge all of you to go and speak to someone that you've never met or you don't know, to start to build those connections, to start to build those conversations, to think about what is next after ERA, but also to understand your work in a broader context. So please, as we now stand and move to the back of the room, we've got some networking time and morning tea will be served over the next little while. I challenge you, go and speak to someone that you haven't spoken to before. Introduce yourself, ask them to introduce themselves, ask about their work, ask what they're passionate about, and make a new connection. We will be back at around 11. Thanks, team.